Welcome to Flashback Friday!
Hi, welcome to the Silver Spleen. My name is Armin Muse, and this is my review of The Untold Story, the 8 Immortals Restaurant Human Meat Roast Pork Buns. Now that's a mouthful. Some movies are better left unseen. The Untold Story isn't one of them. It's based on real events that took place in Macau. For reasons that are still unclear, a man murdered a large group of people, including an entire family, in a restaurant. But that's not really special, is it? Well, he wasn't done, because to get rid of the evidence, he chopped up the bodies, fed them through a meat grinder, and made char siu bao, or barbecued roast pork buns, out of them. And then, he fed them to the customers. When people started to become suspicious, he tried to say that the owner and his family had emigrated, which, in a sense, they had. When he was eventually found out for the murders, he committed suicide in prison, so we'll never know exactly why he did it. But it is easy to know why The Untold Story, which is based on these murders, is one of the most infamous films of the last 25 years. It's usually lumped in with those movies, the ones that are talked about by a lot more people than have watched them, and usually by very conscious choice. The Untold Story willfully violates some of cinema's, and even society's, strongest taboos about violence. But it doesn't do so in a completely exploitative fashion. It certainly is gratuitous and graphic, but I honestly didn't feel that it was exploitative. Obviously, this film is extremely memorable. You'll never look at char siu bao the same way again. Or chopsticks, for that matter. I'd heard about this movie for a long time before I ever actually got to see it. Once I did, I have to admit, I wasn't as horrified as I thought I would be. But that makes sense because in my mind, without having actually seen it, I had built it up to be so horrific that there was no way it could live up, down, to that level. Don't get me wrong, it's still very violent, disturbing, and repugnant. But there is, I think, a good reason for the film to be so viciously graphic. Popular culture sometimes romanticizes or even glorifies criminals, including murderers. It would be impossible to like, much less want to emulate, Wang Qihang. He is a completely revolting human being. But let's face it, you'd have to be somebody like that to do the things that we see him do. There's a good reason why Anthony Wong got the award for Best Actor for doing this film. He's compelling, believable, just unpleasant. The trick with these kinds of films, especially films with lower budgets, is to trick the viewer into thinking they see more than they actually do. An Untold Story certainly does that. If you approach some of the nastier sections logically, you can see how they avoided not only having to cut things out, no pun intended, but also to be able to do things with a much lower budget that are still quite cinematically effective. Like Hard Boiled and some other films from the early 90s, one reason The Untold Story was so relevant is because it really touched on people's anxieties about 1997. People were nervous, some of them were afraid, and they weren't sure how much freedom they would have after 1997, so some of them wanted to indulge that freedom and kind of intentionally frighten themselves by watching Category 3 movies. Those movies certainly provided freedom and titillation and anxiety, and The Untold Story supplies it in spades. So much so that people stopped buying char siu bao after the movie came out. But they got over it. I mean, after all, it's food. Untold Story is also a very well-directed movie. Herman Yao manages to create a very constant sense of dread, and his structuring of the film adds to the tension. He was smart enough to put some comic relief in the midst of all the nastiness he shows us, and it really makes the film even more of a roller coaster, until the end. There's no relief from that, and I think that was his point. The Untold Story is not an easy film to watch, but it is watchable, and I think you should watch it. In the description, there's a link where you can buy a copy of this movie. Please don't forget to check out the bonus video for this review. It's really something. If you enjoyed this review, please leave me a comment. If you don't enjoy the review, leave me a comment. And if you enjoy the channel, please subscribe. That way you'll get to see all the new videos right away. Thank you for watching.